Next week, of course, is Purim. So there'll be no class. So I thought that tonight, rather than talking about the Parsha, I'll talk a little bit about Purim. And rather than giving you a drasha about Purim, I thought I would, in a very practical sense, talk about how we observe the day, what we're meant to get out of it. There are 4 basic mitzvahs that we observe on Purim. The first is the reading of the Megillah. We read the Megillah the night of Purim, the following day. The second mitzvah we do is Mishloach Manos. We send gifts of edibles to one another. The minimum is to send to a single recipient 2 types of ready-to-eat food. If you want to send more, you're certainly able to send more. Nowadays, I think it's become like a social obligation. You have to send certain people. But in theory, the idea of Mishloach Manos is to send one person. Then there's Matanos Lavyanim, to give gifts to the poor. And here you have to give to at least 2 different poor people a gift of money, or it could be food, but usually it's with money. And then there's the mitzvah of Su'udah, to eat the festive Purim meal. These are the 4 basic mitzvahs of Purim. Of course, all the mitzvahs that we practice every other day of the year still apply on Purim. We still daven, we still, if you're a man, put on film, etc. These are the 4 special mitzvahs of Purim. The Rav Tzadok HaKohen, in his Sefer Sisei Laila, says something which is somewhat surprising, that these 4 mitzvahs correspond to the 4 letters of God's name. The name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, comprised of 4 letters. These 4 letters correspond to the 4 mitzvahs of Purim. Now, whatever the connection is, whatever the correspondence is, but the fact that he makes such an association means we're not dealing with simple things. We're dealing with something that is very, very profound. And the tragedy of Purim is that Purim has become, in many people's eyes, a children's holiday. And as all things that are associated with children, we tend to denigrate it. We treat it not seriously. It's childish. It's not serious. It's not like Rosh Hashanah and Kippur or Pesach. Those are adult holidays. Purim is a child's day. The truth is that it's not so. Purim is a very, very significant day, a very serious day. We're meant to get a lot out of it. It's true. There are aspects that even a child can appreciate. But we shouldn't allow the fact that it can be understood on a simple level to interfere with the fact that it can also be understood on a very, very deep level. But let's talk about these 4 mitzvahs a little bit. First, the mitzvah of Kriyas and Megillah. There's a famous thought from the Barditchever, the Kedushas Levi. He takes a Mishnah in Masechus Megillah and he gives it a twist. The Mishnah says, "Hakariyas Megillah lemafreya lo yotza." If you read the Megillah in reverse, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. Let's say a person comes late to shul, and they've already started. So you figure, I'll hear the end, and then I'll read the beginning. And I'll have read the whole thing, just not in order. So the Mishnah says, no, Hakariyas Megillah lemafreya. If you read it in reverse, you're not yotza. You have to read the beginning first and then the end. If you read it backwards, you haven't discharged your obligation. The Barditchever puts it this way: if you read the Megillah as if it is only relevant to the past, as if it's only an account of past events, it teaches us history of the Jews of Persia. But it has no bearing on the future, then you haven't really fulfilled the obligation. In other words, you've missed the point. Technically, you may have fulfilled the obligation. You heard every word of the Megillah, but you missed the boat. Because the idea of the Megillah is not simply that we should understand the history of the Jews of Persia. There are lessons that we are meant to take out of it which are relevant for us in the future. So if you read it only with a backwards view, you haven't fulfilled the main objective of the ordinance. You have to read it with a forward-looking view. You have to take out of it lessons that are relevant for the future. I once heard a very interesting thought. How does the Megillah refer to itself? So in two places in the Megillah refers to itself. In one place, it calls itself a sefer. The Nichtov B'Sefer. Mordechai and Esther wrote the Megillah in a sefer. It was written as a book, as a sefer. In another place, it's called Igeres HaPurim Hazos. This letter of Purim. So what is it? Is it a book or is it a letter? So the Gemara says it's both. That in the halachas of Megillah, there are aspects in which it resembles a sefer, and there are aspects in which it resembles a letter. So the Gemara says, for example, just like a sefer Torah is written on parchment, can't be written on regular paper, it has to be written on animal skin. So a Megillah also has to be written on parchment. In that sense, it's like a sefer. In what sense it's like an igeres? There are certain leniencies that when you sew together the sheets of a sefer Torah, you have to sew them all the way from top to bottom. And for a Megillah, it's not necessary to have such a permanent stitching. If you have 3 stitches, that's considered enough. This is considered like a letter. With a letter, even if you sew together the sheets, you don't do it with such strong stitching. It's not important. It's not necessary to preserve it for all time. So therefore, even a minimal stitching is good enough. And therefore, there's a leniency that in the Megillah, a minimal stitching is also good enough.
It's not read like a sefer either. It's all unrolled and piled up.
There's a custom. That's one of the reasons for that custom, that instead of keeping it in a roll, you unfold it, at least the reader unfolds it, to show that it's really an igeres, it's really like a letter. Now the question is, okay, so it's very interesting, parchment and minimal stitching, but what is the difference between a sefer and the letter? So I once heard from an Adam Gold the following. Imagine if you would stumble across a letter that was sent to me. We'll use the Millers as an example. Let's say a letter was sent to them from their children in Eretz Israel. And it's filled with all sorts of personal things. That we went for Shabbos to Tanta, whoever, in Netanya, and the Cholent was so good, and the grandchildren have started to do this and do that, and so on and so forth. So when they get this letter, they read it again and again and again. Every detail is so interesting. It's so heartwarming to hear about how the family is getting together and what the children are doing and so on and so forth. But if I would stumble across that letter, there would be absolutely no interest to me. I mean, who are these people? Who cares where they went for Shabbos and what they ate and what they get, right? An igeres is something which is very, very personal. It's a letter. It's something which is very private. It's a personal thing. Right? A sefer is for mass publication. Because no one publishes a book for an audience of one. Right? If you're publishing a book, the assumption is that this is of general interest, that there's an audience. It might not be a universal audience, but at least that there are many people that are going to get something out of this book. The Megillah is both. It's a sefer and it's an igeres, which means that there are general lessons that are applicable to everybody, to every Jew. And we can talk about those, because they're the same lessons for all of us. The relevance of the Megillah story to me may be the same thing as it is to you, and in that sense it's a sefer. It's a sefer which has broad appeal, broad interest, and there are general lessons that are of interest to all Jews. But the Megillah also is a letter. That means that there's a message in there which is just for you. That Mordechai and Esther were able to insert in the Megillah messages, lessons, hints, which are just special for you, exactly what you need to hear. And that lesson might not be relevant to anybody else. It's there just for you. And in that sense, it's also an igeres. Now, that's an amazing thing, but of course the Gemara tells us that the Megillah was written b'ruach HaKodesh. It was written with divine inspiration. Obviously, no human being could write a book which is personalized in that sense. That it's designed in such a way that whoever reads it will find something in it which is just meant for him and him alone. But that's the idea of Ruach HaKodesh. There's divine inspiration. You could write such a work. And that's what the Megillah is. So it's a sefer and it's an igeres at the same time. That means there's something which is we can discuss in class, and it's of interest to everybody, and there are important lessons. But you should know there's something there for you. very personal, very, very intimate. And that's the sense of Igeris. It's private. It won't be of any interest to me. But to you, when you stumble across it, it is meant for you. It has your address on it. It was mailed from Shushan to you. It's just taken a long time to get here. But you know, that's how the post office works. It takes a long time till it comes. Now, the question is, then how do you get this message? Are you going to miss it, or are you going to get the message, the very personal message? So the trick over here is to be prepared. Because you can't just go into Purim, and the first time you've seen the Megillah is when you arrive at Shul. Or you can't just rely on the fact that a year ago I heard the story. Because really it's a very important thing to really look at the Megillah, to read it. It's not that long, 160-something verses, I believe. Certainly in translation, you can read it in a half hour without a problem. But the important thing is to think about it. To think about it. And you know, the Megillah, every word of the Megillah, every line of the Megillah, there are questions, there are problems, there are difficulties. And you think about it, and you think about it, and you delve into it, you may discover the message that is relevant to you. We can point out some of the general messages, in the sense that it's called Sefer. But the points that are relevant to you as an individual, you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper beneath the surface. So that's your homework assignment. If you now in Purim you have 1 week, by all means you should make that effort. You should get a hold of a Megillah. If translation will be helpful with the translation, there are many commentaries in the Megillah that are very, very good, both in translation and in the original Hebrew. And it's worthwhile just to sit, but even without the commentaries, just to sit, discuss. Sometimes when you have 2 people and you're discussing, talking about the story, sometimes a question comes up. Sometimes there's something which you may have taken for granted, the other person points out. And it's worthwhile to delve into these things, so that when you come Purim to hear the Megillah and Shul, you're not going to be coming like a person who's unprepared, but you really will have been prepared because you spent time doing it. There's a custom that's brought down, a very, very interesting custom. It seems to me that it has lapsed, but the Chazal bring this custom in a work called Masechah Sofrim. Masechah Sofrim was a work that was contemporary with the period after the Mishnah. And it says that there was a custom on the 2 Saturday nights before Purim. There was a custom to prepare the Megillah. That 2 nights ago, on the first Saturday night after Rosh Chodesh, the custom is to prepare the first 5 chapters. And on this coming Saturday night, the custom is to prepare the last 5 chapters. This was the custom, aside from the reading of the Megillah on Purim, but by way of preparation, the 2 Motzei Shabbosos before Purim to prepare. And it seems to me it's a very, very good custom. So I mentioned it in yeshiva, and I said that if you're looking for something to do Saturday night, this might be a good thing to consider doing, preparing the Megillah. So 2 boys took me up on it. They said, well, you want to know less from Megillah, so they'd come to my house. So we'll do it. So they came to my house, and we learned some Megillah. I have to confess we didn't complete the entire half. We did about a chapter and a half. We got bogged down with a lot of questions. But that type of preparation makes all the difference. So on the personal level, obviously I don't know what's going on in your lives, and I'm not even going to attempt. But let's talk about some of the general lessons that emerge from the Megillah, just in a very, very general sense. The story of the Megillah is probably the finest example of the survival of the Jewish people in Golus, the survival of the Jewish people in exile. You know, we say the Pesach Seder, Sheb'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, Omdim aleinu l'chaloseinu, they rise up against us to destroy us, v'akadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam, and God saves us from their hands. And we believe this is true in every generation, but the paradigm for such an occurrence of someone rising up to destroy us and are being saved, of course, is the Purim story. The Purim story is the finest example because really here it's all's well that ends well, that the Jews not only are spared as a people, but they are victorious over their enemies, and they rise to great power, in a total overturning of events. So the Megillah really is the paradigm of that, but we understand that the survival of the Jewish people in the Purim story was not a fluke. It was a function of God's love and concern for the Jewish people, and therefore we believe that that is eternal. And that b'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, there are other such stories. Maybe not as dramatic, maybe there are some losses associated with those episodes of survival, but nevertheless, the Purim story, in a real sense, repeats itself in every generation. And I know it's hard to look at it this way. We look at the Holocaust as being a great tragedy in Jewish history, and of course it was. The loss of 6 million people is a terrible, terrible tragedy. It can't be belittled in any sense. But we also have to know at the same time that the miraculous survival of the Jewish people is a miracle that we have to be grateful for. Because Hitler could have been successful. His failure to annihilate the Jewish people should not be taken for granted. He could have been successful. And the fact that Jews survived, and more than just survived, but miraculously were able to rebuild in such a short time as after the Holocaust, is just a miracle beyond comprehension. By analogy, we talk about American blacks in the period after the Civil War. And you're talking about people who were not condemned to annihilation. They were enslaved. And yet, it's 140 years later, and they still seem to be bearing the burden of that enslavement. And the Jews are no longer considered a persecuted class, and probably haven't been considered that for the last 30, 40 years, maybe even 50 years. It was by the mid-1950s, I guess, the Jews already were considered a successful, thriving community, perhaps a decade after the Holocaust. So the miraculous survival of the Jewish people and the reconstruction, the rebuilding of the Jewish people, of the state of Israel, of Jewish life in the diaspora is just amazing. And it's really the Purim story in a different form. And it's all related to divine providence, God's concern for the Jewish people, God's directing the course of history. And it's the Purim story that has given hope to Jews in the darkest hours. And really two stories. It's the story of the Exodus from Egypt, but the Purim story as well, that has given hope to Jews that we will survive our tormentors and we will live to rebuild our lives.